I was 14 years old when I moved out of the city with my parents. They assured me that living in the country would be a peaceful and wonderful experience, but I was mad that I had to leave my friends. Not only that, but our new place was very remote. There were no other kids in the area, and since it was summer vacation, it would be weeks until I would be able to meet anyone. Our place was on a country road, surrounded by forest and the occasional farm field. We would see cows grazing freely, and they would sometimes block the roads. The nearest neighbor was miles away, a big change from our old place, which was much more densely populated. The isolation was both serene and eerie, especially during the nights, when darkness covered everything around us. Our house was a large 2-story place, with wood panel siding. It looked rustic on the outside, but it was nicely updated on the interior. There was a 2-car garage at the front, where some of our things were still sitting, waiting to be unpacked. As I settled into my new room, I took a look out my window. My room was at the back of the house, and there was a slight slope going away from the house. Because of that, I could see a fair distance away. As I looked, I thought I could see a light in the distance, maybe a fire, but I wasn't sure. I thought maybe there was a cabin or something out there, so I didn't worry, and then I went to bed. The next morning, I looked out my window again, and with the sun's light, I could see there was nothing where I had seen that light before. Not a cabin or another house. I figured somebody was out there late walking around, but that seemed strange. There was nothing around there, and there were no real hiking trails or campsites in the area. One evening, as I was gazing out my window, I saw a shadowy figure among the trees. It was just 10 or 20 feet away from our backyard. I thought it was a person, but I could hardly see. The sight sent chills down my spine, and my heart pounded heavily. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the moonlight, but the figure remained. It seemed like a man, wandering aimlessly in the darkness. I was terrified, so I rushed to my parents, explaining what I had seen. They tried to calm me down, and assured me it was probably just an animal, or my imagination, getting the best of me. They said that our new home might take some getting used to, and that I shouldn't worry too much. They knew I was feeling lonely, and they thought things would improve for me once I began school. But the feeling of being watched continued to plague me, and I couldn't shake off that image of the mysterious figure in my mind. Every night, I would glance out my window, half expecting to see him again, but that didn't happen. I didn't see the figure, but I would occasionally see a light in the distance. One night I woke up to strange noises downstairs. I was shaking in my bed as I listened intently. It sounded like somebody was moving around the house. I was scared, but I thought it was probably my mom or dad. I tiptoed to my parents' room and slowly pushed open the door. I could still hear the footsteps downstairs. As soon as I peeked into my parents' room, I noticed they were both fast asleep in bed. That's when I knew that we had an intruder. I rushed to their bed and woke them up. My dad was up right away. The noises were even louder than before. He grabbed a baseball bat from our spare room and cautiously went downstairs to investigate. My mom called the police, and we huddled together, waiting anxiously for him to return. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash. We didn't know what it was at the time, but I now know that it was the back door slamming shut. I looked out the window and saw a man running through our backyard. The outdoor lights were on, and I could see his long shadow sprawled out along the grass as he ran. It was quite a terrifying sight. Within minutes, the police arrived, but the guy was already gone. When they interviewed me, I told them about the strange things I had been seeing. The next day, the police conducted a search of the woods around our house. The next evening, the police officers came back to give us an update. They found a makeshift camp in the woods. He had been living there for weeks, watching us from a distance. The officers found a shelter and other belongings scattered in the woods. The creepiest part is they found some items that belonged to me, mostly articles of clothing that hadn't been unpacked yet. He must have broken into our garage to steal them. I don't even want to think about what the guy was doing with them. As the truth unfolded, my parents were in disbelief. They never imagined that my fears were based on reality. It turned out the man I had been seeing through the window was real all along. He had been stalking us, waiting for the right opportunity to break into our home. The police were never able to track the man down, but I occasionally still see a light in the distance, one that seems similar to the one I saw before. I think that man is still out there. Maybe he comes and goes. We have a security system now, but that doesn't make me feel better. I'm still worried that he'll come back. A few years ago, my husband Connor and my 3-year-old daughter Addison moved to a new house temporarily. Ours had been flooded due to heavy rain and severe weather conditions. We were grateful that we had a dry and safe place to stay. The house was a brick, low-set one, surrounded by unkempt, tangled gardens. The inside gave off a dark and gloomy appearance. It was very old, and the lighting wasn't very good. It consisted of many thin hallways, with only a few lamps mounted onto the walls. The only actual ceiling light was in the bathroom. Given that, the house was quite dark, even during the day, and almost pitch black at night. My husband had to leave town for work on the second night, and I was nervous about my daughter and I being alone. I felt uneasy and unsettled in the new house, but I put it down as simply being in an environment that I was not familiar with. I figured that I'd soon get used to it. A couple of hours after my husband left for work, I put my daughter in the bathtub and was washing her hair when I heard clear as day somebody called out, "Hey, Em." I immediately spun around surprised because the house was absolutely silent and I wasn't expecting anyone else to be there. "Dad, is that you?" I said. I was certain it was my dad's voice. It sounded almost identical to his voice. And also, my name is Emma. He's the only person who calls me Em. There was no reply, not a single sound other than my daughter splashing in the tub. I quickly rinsed my daughter's hair and reached for my phone from the bathroom sink, dialing my dad's number. "Dad, are you in my house?" I asked. "Hey, Em. No, I'm at work. Why's that?" I was quite shaken because I was certain of what I heard. "I just heard someone say my name. It sounded like you, and Connor's away at work, so it wasn't him," I told him. "No, sorry, definitely wasn't me. You're just imagining things, being at a new house and all," he told me. Still being certain of what I heard, I agreed with my dad and hung up the phone. I had to get my daughter out of the bath. To get from the bathroom to my bedroom was just one long hallway. I wrapped a towel around my daughter and walked to the bedroom to dress her. I turned around to see her still standing down at the end of the hallway, towel wrapped around her, just staring at me. "Addison, come and get dressed, please." Sorry, I can't." She shook her head nervously. "Well, why can't you?" She slowly raised her arm forward and pointed down the dimly lit hallway directly in front of me. "Because that little girl is standing right there," she said. Her comment made my skin crawl, and I was at a loss for words, although I attempted to brush it off. "What? Addison, come on. There's no little girl. Come on and get dressed." She lowered her arm, but remained staring for a couple more seconds. "I don't think she's a good girl, Mommy," she added. I was really disturbed by this, and decided to call my sister to come over. My husband didn't have phone service at work. While waiting for her, I put a mattress on the lounge room floor. My daughter and I would sleep there for the night to avoid going back down the hallway. After putting Addison to bed, my sister arrived. I made her a coffee and brought it to her on the front porch. "So whatever you have to tell me, I guess Connor wants to know," she laughed. I was puzzled, having no idea what she meant by that. "Connor? What do you mean?" "Connor's at work," I said. "Are you guys trying to play a joke on me? Because who's standing in that window over there?" She pointed to my bedroom window, which was behind her. I was absolutely frozen. Looking from the porch into my bedroom stood a large outline of a man. "Oh my God," I muttered under my breath. I hadn't told my sister a thing about what was going on, so she was quite confused and creeped out. We packed some clothes and stayed at her house for a couple days until my husband got home from work. Being a skeptic and definitely not a believer in the paranormal, my husband assumed there was a logical explanation for the encounters, and insisted we go back to the house. It was the first night that my husband was home. My daughter and I were having a movie night at my friend's house, and didn't plan on coming home until late. I got a call from my husband, frantically telling me to come home. He wanted me to pack up some things, because we would stay at my mom's for the night. When I got home, he explained that he was laying on the mattress on the lounge room floor watching movies, and was starting to drift off to sleep. Then he heard the front door open and slam closed. He assumed I had come home, and didn't bother opening his eyes. He said he heard footsteps walking towards him, and felt small soft hands pat his head, brushing his hair back. When he opened his eyes, no one was there. We moved out of that house as soon as we could, which was a couple of weeks later, and it's safe to say that it's nice to be living in a home with no creepy ghost man, little girls, and no cupboard doors repeatedly slamming at night. I lived in a haunted house for over 2 decades, so there are several examples of things that happened over the years. The house was built in the early 1700s. It was a beautiful, rambling old house with a big garden, outbuildings, 5 bedrooms, and a working fireplace. My parents, my 3 siblings, and I were overjoyed to be moving into this spacious house after living in a cramped 2.5-bedroom terrace with no garden. My parents had bought the house for an incredibly low price. Even for the 90s, it was cheap. I do wonder now if that had something to do with the hauntings. It wasn't long before we realized that we weren't the only residents. A few days after we moved in, my mom was downstairs in the long hallway. It ran the length of the house, from the front door to the kitchen, past the wide old staircase. As she watched, she saw the shadow of a man who seemed to be dressed in Jacobean clothing. He walked along the wall, then disappeared into the wall by the stairs, as if he walked through a door that wasn't there. But that was only the start. We quickly got used to seeing and hearing things that weren't there. We'd constantly see black shapes swiftly moving out of the corner of our eyes. When we turned to look, there'd be no one there. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, we would often hear voices talking softly at the base of the stairs. It sounded like 3 or 4 men murmuring to each other, like a group of people planning something. But if we ever went to the stairs to listen, the voices abruptly stopped. Now bear in mind that this was a detached house with thick, solid walls, and only a quiet couple for neighbors. We called the voices the murmuring men, and grew quite fond of them. My brother liked to stay up late and play video games in his room. Between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., he would often see a woman standing in his bedroom. She was wearing an apron over a Victorian dress. He told us about it, and we all agreed that it was weird. Later, when we were having the house renovated, we discovered an old servant's bell in his room, so perhaps she'd been a servant and was checking if her young master wanted anything. As well as seeing and hearing things, there were other indicators that we weren't alone. Things would go missing. We'd look high and low for whatever it was. Then later, that same object would turn up in an incredibly unlikely place, like on top of a wardrobe or somewhere where we'd already searched. We'd even joke that the house had taken it, and sometimes my mom would yell, "Come on, house, this isn't funny, give it back," which usually resulted in it turning up in a day or so. But despite these ghostly goings-on, it was a very cozy home. Everyone who visited noted how welcoming and open the house felt. After my parents divorced, that changed. My mom continued to live in the house with us kids. She made some adjustments to it so that we could put it on the market. I don't know if that alone shook the spirits up, or whatever it was, because we were all sad and depressed following the divorce. Perhaps those emotions were feeding things, but the atmosphere in the house changed completely. It grew heavily oppressive. You would feel like somebody was watching you in the hallway. None of us kids would go upstairs at night by ourselves. We'd wait and go together. You just did not want to be alone in the hallway or on the stairs. That feeling that something was right behind you was really intense. My sister had to go downstairs alone at one point, and as she was walking back to the stairs, she heard footsteps walking behind her. She closed her eyes and ran back upstairs as fast as she could. One afternoon, I was in my room reading. I suddenly heard a woman sobbing loudly. She sounded like her heart was broken. I thought it must have been my mom, or maybe my sister. I ran out onto the landing and called, "Mom, what is it?" There was no one there. The noise stopped. I ran downstairs. My mom and sister were sitting chatting happily in the kitchen. They were fine. They hadn't heard a thing. 6 months later, my brother and sister heard the same woman crying. My brother thought he'd seen what looked like the swish of a dark blue skirt on the landing, but he couldn't be sure. My mom came upstairs one night to her bedroom and found every item in her dressing table had been pushed onto the floor, as if someone had swept it off. We'd all been downstairs, and her window was closed. Finally, late one evening, my sister was doing the washing up in the kitchen. The sink was in front of a large sash window. The glass in the window was old. I think it was as old as the house, but it's thick and very wavy, and distorts the reflections. As she was washing up, she felt the presence of someone in the room with her, someone taller than her, standing behind her. She thought it must have been one of our brothers, and looked up to see a tall reflection in the window. She turned around to speak to them, and there was no one there. My mom called the local vicar, who came around with a specialist colleague and blessed the house. They sprinkled holy water and said prayers. It definitely seemed to help. The house felt lighter, and we didn't see or hear anything else. My mom sold the house, and at the same time, I left home and moved into my own place. Someone else lives there now, and I often wonder if the spirits have come out again to see their new owners. The following is a true story that I'm positive happened, but I can't find a conventional explanation for it. When I was 4 years old, my family lived in military housing in Winnipeg in the early 70s. I had an older brother who was 6, and I had a younger brother who would have been 1 year old at the time. Our house was a bungalow with a fairly conventional layout for the time. Living room, kitchen, and dining room at one end of the rectangular structure. The bedrooms and bathroom connected to a hallway at the other end. One day, I was sitting in the hallway where I could see my parents in the kitchen. I could also look down the hall towards the doors to the bedrooms. No one was down that hall other than my 1-year-old brother who was sleeping in his room. I was looking down the hall when I saw something impossible. There were 2 bedroom doors on the left side of the hall. I saw something come out of one of the doors closest to me, about 8 or 10 feet away. As I watched, a skeletal arm slowly emerged into the hallway horizontally at my eye level until the elbow was almost showing, but not quite. Then it slowly retreated in the exact same fashion into the room. I remember that the bones looked very real. I now know that they were the color of real bones and were clearly not any kind of plastic replica. The arm bones seemed like they were the size of an adult male's. I knew for certain that we didn't have anything that resembled these bones at all in the house. I also knew for certain that my older brother was not in that area. I could see my parents in the kitchen, and I knew it would not be like them to play a scary prank like that on a 4-year-old. I don't know if I can explain it, but it was clear by the smooth and steady movement of the arm that it wasn't something being held by someone. It looked like it was attached to its owner. My impression was that the arm's owner was aware of me and deliberately revealed itself to me in a non-threatening manner. Despite my age, I knew what I had just seen was extraordinary. I noted that it was the middle of the day and that I was sitting up and wide awake, so I was positive. There was simply no explanation. I wasn't terrified, as one might think. It just simply happened, and then it was done. I had zero interest in going down and looking into that room to see what was there, though perhaps the apparition was an invitation to do so. I didn't tell my parents. Don't ask me why, but you know they wouldn't have believed me. Nothing like this has happened to me since this event, and there didn't seem to be any other strange occurrences in that house. A couple of years ago, I finally thought to ask my parents about that house in Winnipeg. They said they hadn't noticed anything strange there, but the previous owner had died while in the military overseas. So there it is, my one and only experience that I can say with 100% certainty that I'll go into my grave believing was an authentic paranormal event.